We're back with the breaking news. The George Zimmerman defense team withdraws from the Trayvon Martin case. The lawyers made some big news about a call Zimmerman made directly to Angela Corey, the special prosecutor currently investigating the shooting.
Today, we spoke with the special prosecutor's office out of Jacksonville. We have been working over the weekend and diligently trying to set up a meeting between Mr. Zimmerman and the special prosecutor's office. We heard today that George had contacted the prosecutor's office directly. One of the things every defense attorney tells his client is, don't talk to the prosecutors, don't talk to the cops. Frankly, don't talk to anybody until we get control of the situation and do it through counsel. We were a bit astonished.
Angela Corey announced yesterday she's foregoing a grand jury, meaning the decision to charge George Zimmerman rests squarely on her shoulders. Joining me now from Jacksonville, Florida, Russell Smith, a past president for the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys and friend of Angela Corey. And from Fort Lauderdale, Ken Padowitz, a former homicide prosecutor. Thanks to both of you for joining me tonight. Ken, let me start with you.
Reverend.
Ken, in your eyes, what is the biggest development from this afternoon's press conference with Zimmerman's former attorneys?
Well, I'm amazed by the entire press conference. I mean, quite frankly, you'd have to hold me down and have me stare wide-eyed into the noonday sun before I make one of my clients look bad on national television. And in essence, when these two attorneys got on national television, they made their client, or former client, Mr. Zimmerman, look bad. They took away credibility. They chastised him in public for calling the prosecutor. And quite frankly, I'm amazed at this turn of developments. I don't think what they did was necessarily professional. There may be some questions as to how they brought about this news conference, but clearly it cast some credibility issues on Mr. Zimmerman.
Now, Russell Smith, you've been a defense attorney and, in fact, headed the association there in Jacksonville. Does this not really impact the case and the credibility of Mr. Zimmerman?
Well, I think it certainly causes people to wonder about his motives and his actions. Both of the lawyers have good reputations, rather, in the Central Florida area as defense lawyers, and this was a pretty unprecedented news conference. It was very unusual. So you have to assume there were some significant reasons why it happened.
Now, you know Angela Corey, the special prosecutor. Of course, I'm sure you don't know her thoughts on this case, but just from what you know of her, how do you think that someone like her would view this? This has got to impact how she conducts her investigation.
Well, I think she's going to keep her eyes on the prize. I think her goal is going to be to gather as much information as she can to make a charging decision. As far as the impact of what's happened today, I think the most obvious downside to it is likely to be the fact that in the event that Mr. Zimmerman is charged and arrested, the prosecutor is going to be looking for a higher bond or no bond at all, because now there are questions about whether he is, number one, a flight risk, and number two, a danger to the community. And those questions have probably always been there, but they probably weren't as pointed as they are now.
Now, let me go back to you a minute, Ken, because I want to ask Russell something about Ms. Corey, but I want to ask you this, Ken. As he states that about if there's an arrest, the bond issue, and all of that, wouldn't you also say that part of the concern now has to be if the prosecutor's office wanted to talk to Mr. Zimmerman, Mr. Zimmerman has no lawyers. How do they do that?
Exactly. I mean, what these lawyers did today, whether it was intentional or unintentional, is they cast some serious doubts on whether or not Mr. Zimmerman is acting right now in a reasonable manner. So clearly, this prosecutor, who's a very, very intelligent and seasoned homicide prosecutor, is going to take that into account. And if, in fact, she finds the evidence and charges Mr. Zimmerman, she's going to definitely be asking for a bond that's going to prevent Mr. Zimmerman if he is, in fact, a flight risk. There should definitely be questions that are raised by the two lawyers that represented Mr. Zimmerman as to his reasonableness, as to whether or not he's acting rational, and whether or not he is, in fact, a flight risk.
Now, let me go back to you about Ms. Corey, the special prosecutor, Attorney Smith. We spoke with a defense attorney who knows Angela Corey's record well. He says this to us, quote, Angela Corey has always prosecuted tenaciously cases involving shootings. We have the highest percentage of cases on death row of any circuit in Florida, so I would be very surprised if she does not charge George Zimmerman. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think, well, it's absolutely true that we have more people on death row from the 4th Judicial Circuit than I believe any other circuit in Florida. And Angela is a tenacious prosecutor. They seek the death penalty frequently in cases where other prosecutors may have a different view of the evidence, may choose to abandon the death penalty in favor of a life sentence. But she's a straightforward person, and she comes by that dedication to prosecuting violent crime honestly. She's very, very involved in the victims' rights movement, and to her detriment in some cases. Some critics say that she loses sight of her obligation because she is so determined to get justice for victims. So, you know, that is her nature, and it's never stopped her from doing a good job or being a tenacious prosecutor, but some people do believe that that causes problems in her perspective.
Now, Ken, her most controversial case prior to the Trayvon case was the case of Christian Fernandez, a 12-year-old Corey's charging with first-degree murder as an adult. But she explained how she deals with the victim's first prosecution style. Listen to her. I'll read it to you. Sometimes, it's her saying this, sometimes the people murdered aren't innocent. Sometimes they're drug dealers. Sometimes they put themselves in harm's way. And you know what? We fight just as hard for them. When we're done with this, you'll know what we could do with what we had. You'll have every answer you need. This is how she explained her prosecution style. Would that speak to you, saying that she's one that even if someone tries to disparage the victim, that has nothing to do with her going after the evidence of whether or not that person in fact was a victim and the person that killed them or shot them or assaulted them was in fact guilty of a crime? Ken?
Well, it sounds to me like she takes to heart what prosecutors are supposed to be, which is ministers of justice. They're supposed to seek the truth. Sometimes the truth warrants that somebody be charged with a crime and face a very stiff sentence, and sometimes it means that charges are not filed and that the person has not broken the law, or there's not sufficient evidence to charge that person and bring it to a trial. So it sounds to me that she can be tough and yet be fair, and I think that's what we want in prosecutors. We want justice to be served, but we want that toughness to be balanced with fairness.
Russell Smith and Ken Padowitz, thank you both for your time tonight. Still ahead.
Thanks for having
you.
Still ahead, switching gears. Former President Bush rushes out to defend his tax cuts and the people he calls the, quote, so-called rich. We've got a different view on that today from President Obama. Stay with us.